Instead, he calls it an ahistorical syllogism. Presentism is a complicated subject, and there's varying definitions and ways to use the term. But one use of the term is to describe the way in which the present exerts pressure on the historian's construction of the past.
Anyways, let's go into the ahistorical syllogism, because in fact, it was a very apt descriptor. While it is correct that the word presentism would have also been appropriate in this case, they are not the same. I chose this word specifically in my script because I thought it fit better with the point I was trying to make, and it was useful when conducting an analysis. A syllogism is a type of logical argument that uses deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on two premises. It's a foundational concept in classic logics, especially in Aristotelian logic. Syllogisms are at the heart of deductive reasoning. If the form is valid and the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. However, we need to be careful because a syllogism can be logically valid but factually wrong if the premises are false. An example would be, all fish can fly, a salmon is a fish, therefore a salmon can fly. The logical form is intact, but the major premise is false. So, in this context, a ahistorical syllogism would imply a syllogistic argument or line of reasoning that fails to consider or is indifferent to the historical context of the ideas and events being discussed. In essence, what I was suggesting here is that we have to be careful when using a form of reasoning, even if it draws from a logically valid premise, because it could potentially lead to inaccurate or irrelevant conclusions. So I was saying be careful to use only reason and logics when discussing the past. Do you remember when he actually accused me of only using reason and logics to discuss the past? I would call this a lie too, but I'll be honest with you, I don't think this one is a lie. I just think he didn't understand. Coming from the guy who explains every word like his audience are idiots. Case in point.
By ideal, I mean that it's the goal, but in practice, it's one we'll never quite fully reach.
See what I did there? I made a statement about something that he does, and then I found a clip to prove that that is indeed what he does, and my words were not hyperbole. He explained the meaning of the word ideal like his audience is a bunch of imbeciles. I'd like to stress that. Not the meaning of quantum entanglement. Ideal. That's how you make a statement about someone else. Now, differently from him, I couldn't put a sponsor on this video because of the controversial nature of this engagement, even though I'm just defending myself while he lied about me and was financially rewarded for it. But there is one thing I can do, and that is sponsoring myself. As you know, we have created a Metatron plushie for all of our fans and supporters, and we are really trying to hit 200 sales. We are kind of far from it. We still need about 90 sales to be placed, and we only have a few days. If you do like my videos, please consider getting one plushie now. Thank you so much.
The issue about this complaint about history that wants to put the historian outside of the historian's context is that it essentially wishes for a history without the historian.
What does this have to do with me?
You're asking for an analysis of history that stands apart not just from the historian, but also from the time in which the analysis is being conducted.
I what?
A history that exists as an objective and true story to be simply uncovered, untainted by interpretation.
For crying out loud, have the decency to use an argument that I actually make. How about that?
This is impossible to accomplish. History has to fit into modern understandings of the world, and this, alongside many other things, of course, might be a point where me and Metatron fundamentally disagree.
Yep, and had you been civil, dropped the I am better than thou attitude and the character assassination attempts, we could have actually engaged in this disagreement about fundamental truth in a way that would foster academic discourse. But you chose the let's make a slander hitpiece video instead.
But I don't actually think so, and I'll explain why later on. To close off this point about history being a conduit between the past and the present, let me quote American historian Hasok Chan.
Yeah, let's not, considering the fact that he's gonna use now a very long and boring quotation to try and refute an argument that isn't mine, therefore wasting my and your time. Let's skip ahead. Hey Fredda, what's going on here? That's not what my video looked like. Even his video editing software is trying to twist my points to an unrecognizable state. To overlap neatly and perfectly with 20th century European political factions in order to come out with an answer is a flawed analytical method.
Yes, trying to figure out if Hitler was a, quote, I'm with her guy or a member of the Republican Party in 2016 is silly. But luckily, that is not what historians and others are actually doing when they approach this topic.
Two problems here. First, I wasn't complaining about historians. I was talking about people who deal with these topics, mostly YouTubers, so already it's a strawman. However, there are some academics that do nonsense like this, so I'm actually gonna do that now, because you're wrong, regardless. Even though it wasn't my original point, I'll agree with this fictitious version of myself that you created. Good historians don't do that, so we can agree with that, but activists who use their degrees to push their agenda? Oh, they will. Not that I need to, anyone watching this knows this already, but I'm happy to prove this with empirical data anytime. What do we do now? Well, to answer this correctly, first, we need to ensure objectivity to our analysis.
These guys very often present themselves as, quote, rational skeptics who are just presenting the objective facts.
This is not how you make a response video, Fredda. You don't just say how other people present themselves, you prove it with clips. I swear, this thing you do when you put words into people's mouths they have never said and then try to ridicule and attack them for those words you fabricated, you do it so much that it has just become second nature to you. It's muscle memory at this point with this guy.
I talked more about this method in my previous video, whereby it was used by a literal out-and-about Nazi.
And here it is. I was actually surprised it still hadn't come to that. Here is the mental manipulation. Let's look at this closely. I talk about objective reality and facts. Then he says that so do the actual Nazi. What is the conclusion he wants you to draw then? Metatron says X, Nazis say X, Metatron is a Nazi. You see, in this segment, Fredda used two logical fallacies at once, and it's been extremely disingenuous and dishonest. First of all, framing language. He's using emotionally loaded terms, aka Nazis. Also, he's using the so-called association fallacy, sometimes referred to as guilt by association, which is a type of logical fallacy in which someone argues that a claim is true or false based on the character, group, or belief of the person making it, rather than on the merits of the argument itself. In other words, he's attempting to discredit someone's argument by associating them with an unpopular, disreputable, or extreme person or group, even if the connection is weak or non-existent, the latter being the case here. The reason why this is a fallacy is because truth is not determined by who holds a belief, but by the empirical evidence behind it. That's easily proven by the obvious fact that even morally corrupt individuals can be correct about some things. Hence, even if we were in the presence of a real tether between whatever kind of logical or methodological framing I was using with the Nazis, once again, an association that isn't true, but even if it were, associating a claim with a disliked source doesn't automatically invalidate the claim. To think critically, we must slow down and disconnect ideas from identities and evaluate claims on their own merits, not any given association, real or imaginary. Problem is that his intent here is trying to build a questionable historical parallel, exploiting his audience's emotional biases, tribalism, and moral disgust, rather than encouraging rational evaluation of any given data. Another piece of evidence that demonstrates the political propagandistic nature of this channel.
The general gist of it is to depoliticize history as a science, and to portray it as a series of crystallized, unchanging facts, which just so happen to correspond to the person's worldview. You assert things as, quote, just the facts, and reason your way towards why these so-called facts you're presenting are true, without relying on much evidence produced by trained historians.
I have a team behind my production. One is a trained historian, former archaeologist, 2 years of experience digging in Syria. One is a published author. One is an anthropologist with a postdoctoral degree. One is an Egyptologist PhD. I can continue. Also considering that I've shown their names, qualifications, and faces on screen multiple times, but it doesn't matter, because he doesn't care about the truth, nor does he care about evidence. He's gonna say they don't exist. Another lie.
You sidestep the actual debates and uncertainties of history in order to simplify the larger picture. The point is to cleverly avoid actually engaging with history and instead relying on debate and argumentation.
Once again, strawman number... You know what? I actually lost count. What is it by now? 15? Not my statement. I never said this. Why is this video about me if you're not gonna use a single thing I said? You could have put Kermit the Frog at this point on the thumbnail and graphics and it would have made zero difference.
I've talked about so-called objective history in past videos. I'll summarize by saying history is aspirationally objective, but practically cannot be objective because the fundamental nature of the field necessitates all sorts of selection and interpretation that cannot be fully divorced from subjectivities.
Now, to try and strengthen this absurdity that he has just mentioned, he's gonna read a quote to, as always, pretend to be smarter than you, as he does. But before we get to that, let me say this. Alright, so now he's attacking the concept of objective truth in relation to history. If at any point you had any doubt that this was anything but a propaganda channel, welcome to Reality Check.
Here's a quote by E.H. Carr from his book What is History? Quote,
Hold it there, Professor. Rather than listening to the quote, boring you to death, let's analyze his utilization of it. Upon closer inspection, another interesting element to this becomes clear. A lot of Fredda's videos are quotation after quotation by volume. Given, using the occasional quotation to strengthen a position is fine, but his videos are literally him reading what someone else said at you for money.